We're on a timer.
All right,
A lot to unpack. Jimmy, break it down.
we're here with the man, the myth, the legend, former GM of the Brooklyn
He was my
Aces,
coach.
coach, GM
Former,
of the Brooklyn
former.
Aces, Samin. Is it Adwani? Is that right?
Yeah, you nailed it. Look at you, man. Adwani.
Look at me, killing it. But now, Samin, you kind of broke this news yourself yesterday on Twitter. You have a new role, right?
That's right, man. Over the last year and a half being part of the Brooklyn Aces, we obviously were kind of on the sideline, but I would say more involved than most, just given some of this stuff that I worked on as it related to our competition structure and getting the season off the ground in 2024. And I said, you know what? I genuinely believe in this thing. I had the fortune of working for KD and Rich Kleiman and 35 Ventures and investing in startups and sports leagues. And I candidly have never been more bullish about a sport than this one. So it was time to go all in, baby, push all the chips into the center for pickleball, move the family from New York City to Dallas and, be in person at the UPA HQ in downtown. So
But
new
I don't
role
think
as
that was
chief
a smart
strategy
decision.
officer.
Did you know that you guys needed a loan before you made this move?
Yeah, were you aware of that?
Yeah.
that you guys
Yes.
are going bankrupt?
Yes. Let's just put it this way. In any investment that I make, both for work or personally, a heavy amount of diligence is done. And that this was no different. So did I know we needed a loan? Yes. Did they actually announce that we needed a loan 4 weeks ago? Yes. So it was not news to me on day one of the job that we needed this, but like any startup, when the opportunity presents itself and if you need capital, you go out and you get that capital and you keep the business going. And we had a pretty incredible 2024. We had some press releases go out. We talked a lot about player earnings. And so, yeah, it was time to get a little bit more of an injection of capital to kind of cover some of the decisions that the league had made in 2024. And then it's onwards to 2025. Candidly, didn't think it was going to be a huge story, but here we are.
So I want to get into this really quick. So I'm a glutton for punishment. I watched Jill's entire podcast. So the whole thing that she talked about this, okay? So basically, just a little bit of background. She said essentially what happened was 4 weeks ago, like you said, an email went out 3 or 4 weeks ago, essentially saying that PPA or UPA, excuse me, is looking at for a bridge loan. They obviously had all the statistics for the season, everything looked good, but there are some projections that were off. And they need a bridge loan just to get through, a month or two or whatever it is, for 2025. Now, I do mortgages. I'm a mortgage guy. Bridge loans are extremely common. We have people all the time who say they're buying a house and selling another house. Hey, this house hasn't sold yet, but I really need to buy this house before this house sells. Can I get a bridge loan? Happens all the time. We do them all the time. They're very, very common. And so I think when that went out, I mean, like I said, I talked to owners on a daily basis, and none of them seemed concerned at all. Like none of them even batted an eye. Somebody actually told me he would take down the whole thing if he needed to. Like it's not a big deal. So, but Jill goes on her pod and essentially says,
Was it her pod or Twitter first?
It was her pod.
Uh-huh.
She said, emergency, PPA needs an emergency loan. This is a direct quote to continue operations in 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Basically saying that without this loan, I keep saying UPA would not exist. So I watched the pod because I wanted to just stick to the facts because
That's weird.
I don't know, it's weird for me. I love rumors, but I just wanted to Jill is one of those people who I think she does feel like she is fighting for the little guy and she has a noble cause, but her delivery sometimes, and honestly, she's just polarizing. She's probably not the right person to do it, just my opinion. So I watched the pod, and a few of the things that she says at the very beginning of her podcast, she says, these are direct quotes, by the way. This is not something I have personally researched. And I'm just being semi-thorough. We haven't added anything up. And then she said, basically essentially saying that like we didn't dive deep into this, but we're gonna break this story anyways. So with that being said, she essentially obviously said you guys needed $10 million, but she also said that UPA in the merger raised 75 million, which is not entirely accurate because we know that it was not 75 million cash. So she said you burned through 75 million, right? And
Yeah, I think that's like to your sort of lack of research
yeah,
point in general, it seems like that's like a through line in a lot of this. So let's talk about the 75 million for a second. In
yeah,
any merger or many mergers, the prescribed value is a combination of things. It could be cash, it could be debt, it could be equity for certain areas. So the total amount of investment as part of the merger was 75 million. That included the joint venture with Pickleball TV, which was prescribed a value. That included cash, that included equity from other entities that were getting sort of pulled into UPA. The majority of that 75 was cash. But after legal fees and everything else, the balance that actually went into the bank account of UPA was much lower than 75, closer to 30 to 35 million. So like that's like point of clarity one, which again, I think if we were a sophisticated, journalistic media entity that surrounded pickleball, you would have kind of understood that. Like when Kroger and Albertsons talk about merging, and the DOJ shuts it down, like they're not just all putting a bunch of cash from their bank accounts into one bank account and saying like, all right, we're together. They sort of prescribe value to the various assets. We did the same thing.
well, yeah, and one entity, we can call it what it is. PPA was a little bit more established at the point than MLP, right? They had
Yeah.
more operations, they had headquarters, they had all of these things. And so, yeah, they have value in some of those things as opposed to just the cash, needing to bring cash to the table.
Yeah,
And yeah,
exactly.
you've got to give them value for those things, right? Like, no one's
No,
going to
exactly.
merge no one's going to merge if, like, if they don't receive the value for their hard work they've already done.
Totally, totally. And then like to play that out further, there were also decisions made in 2024 that were like strategic decisions shared with the board, shared with team owners that weren't necessarily part of the original operating plan, but we decided to buy back two teams as an example,
Yeah.
which was widely announced, covered, et cetera, et cetera. The misnomer is that the cash for those teams was due at the time it went public, which is not the case, right? We, have sort of installments of payments due for those teams, and that wasn't part of the original operating plan. But the positive side of that is you wouldn't buy back those teams if you didn't think you could sell them for more in the future. So it was an
Well,
obvious strategic indicator to say, hey, we'll buy these teams on, day one at X dollars with the plan at some point to go to market with them in the future for a multiple of X.
yeah, so it's a strategic decision. What do you think, just going off topic a little bit, what do you think the value of teams are right now? If you had to
Oh,
put
let's
it
ask let's ask our guy Tyler there because I love when Tyler goes on these team
To the
valuations.
moon.
I
I love
don't get it.
MLP.
What's
I
the
love
point?
MLP. It is whatever
what do you,
somebody is willing to pay for it.
yeah, I mean
That's
that's
true.
everyone's market value, but if you had to put a dollar value on a team right now,
I think right now, somebody could see any price from 5 to 10 million. But if this year's proves to be right, then I think within the next 1 to 2 years, then that amount could significantly increase to 10 to 20 or more.
And the big difference here in what you're getting from buying into an MLP team is people think you're just getting the MLP part of this, right? I'm just getting the four players on my team that I got to travel around the country and sort of compete, et cetera, et cetera. That's not true. You get equity in UPA. What does UPA also have? It operates the PPA Tour and MLP, which is probably the biggest business advantage we have as a league because a ton of these sports, golf, tennis, even like basketball to an extent, are sort of trying to cover a combination of the individual format and the team format, right? Live in the PGA Tour in golf, tennis has gone with the Davis and Laver Cup in addition to the majors and their tours. Like I was, when I was working for Kevin Durant on the venture side, there was a ton of like 1v1 or 3v3 basketball leagues trying to like sort of create a separate product.
Yeah, that new
So
women's 3v3 coming out.
yeah, you've got Unrivaled, right, with the women's league.
Yeah.
And so we have the benefit of having launched with both, right? And like golf and tennis, especially, are seeing sort of the struggle that comes with trying to catch the team format up to where the individual format is, because the individual format is at 30, 40, whatever, 100 years of a head start. And so when you think about like how to prescribe the value for an MLP team, you're really getting both components. It's the value that the team is able to generate, which as the year progressed, we saw teams doing a ton more, whether it was community events, whether it was sponsorship logos on their jerseys, whether it was activations around their players, which the Squeeze and others are good at. And you're getting the equity in UPA, which operates at a centralized level, the PPA Tour and MLP.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, you just sold me. Where do I sign up? How much is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you get
I
commission?
mean, no, man. No, listen, I'm as clean whistled as it gets. My training came from the NBA. Like, I'm not trying to take, pocket to the side. Maybe Connor Pardo will buy me a nice steak if we sell a couple of these teams for 10 million plus.
That's the plan, right? Like ideally it's to sell sell these two teams.
Well, it's part of the plan. I think plan one, like Tyler, you said it right. Plan one is to crush 2025, right? I mean, MLP, for as long as I've been a part of it, hasn't exactly had been able to say on January 1 what it's planning to do for the rest of the year and then actually do it, right? Which is kind of the second part of all of this.
Last year it was April and we were just getting scheduling and things out. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And you were like, oh, what am I getting? How many games am I playing? How many events am I going to be at? Are my players going to be at all my events?
And then
how am I going to
the year before that, like just backtracking, the year before that, it was like, who's going to Atlanta? Nobody's going to show up to Atlanta. And then it was like, okay, we got to modify the finals, all of these things. So this truly is like the first full year, right? Like,
yeah, I mean,
1.
Jan 1, right? We've got a schedule. Within the next couple of weeks, we plan on sharing which teams are going to be at every event. And then from there, like the best part of it is we're finally condensing it. Like the ebb and flow, like bob and weave act of, all right, like we've got MLP, Atlanta, and then we like disappear for a month and then we come back with MLP DC. Like that is, as much as we can, we're trying to transition away from that because that's really, really difficult to keep fans engaged. So yeah, the idea between this April and August season, like any other traditional smart major sports league does, is they condense their content into a fixed window and then they sort of story tell and explain, the narrative and like get excitement going around that.
Love it. So we have a Discord that we're a part of, and we had a bunch of people ask questions. They wanted to
right, but the app's live now, baby, on iOS today. Slight plug. I'm pretty sure it's like literally live today. Download it. That's a shameless plug. Thanks, Tyler. Ahead of the Masters to watch our guy Tyler play.
Samin, let me ask you a question. So this whole thing, like you said, Jill kind of broke this whole thing. It is what it is. But one thing she did, she brought up actually some good points in her podcast. I can't believe I'm saying that, but between all of the like, grinding of the axe and like, one of the things she said that made me laugh was she was like, I know PPA amateur registrations are down. And then, K-Dub, her partner, was like, well, how do you know? She's like, well, I didn't actually research anything, but I just know that as a pro, I used to never be able to get practice courts, and now I can. So, I mean, that's hard-hitting, like hardcore, research there. But one thing she did ask, and I think this is a good question for you, is what's your take? I mean, we're a year and a half, maybe 2 years away from a lot of these players hitting the free agent market again. We have 3 international events, tours, whatever we want to call them now, PWR, the Global Sports League, whatever the other one is. APP seems to, still kind of be hanging around there. I mean, they have pre-qualifiers now because they have so many up-and-coming pros trying to play. Are we going to see like another tour wars in 2 years? Like, what's the take, or what's the plan for UPA moving forward to kind of stop that from happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, will we see another Tour Wars? My hope and strong conviction is absolutely not. What we are doing, and some of this is now public, right? Like Gabe Tardio, he just
Yeah.
signed, as was
Did you
announced,
sign, have you guys signed anyone else, by the way? Can you break any
yeah, there's
news?
other players. Gabe is not the only one. He's just the only one that's been leaked. I'm not one to like break the news. It's the players' news or the league's news to share. That's not my MO. But Gabe's we can talk about because it's out there,
If we
and he
mention names,
signed.
can you blink twice if it's accurate?
Can I can I
Yo,
can I break the news?
Jimmy's great at breaking news. So if Jimmy finds out, it's on him to do his media justice and share it. But you can do that. Like I would actually wait because you're better off sharing like the whole behemoth than you are sharing like spray and pray one by one. Because then all of a sudden, like if you're a fan, you're like, okay, now I like can't keep up with who's there and
That's
who's
true.
not. But
But
like talk
obviously,
about Gabe.
there's some other big names that have signed.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like Gabe's is public. Gabe's is a 3-year deal starting in 2025. So his already shows that we are willing to go beyond 2026 because we know we're going to be here after 2026. I think like on the competition, the competitive league side, this is like again, I would say pretty typical for like early stage industries, I would say, or like categories where you're gonna constantly have people, popping up, existing, not existing, targeting different categories, tactics, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like really hard to predict what PWR's 3-year strategy is, or the APP's 3-year strategy, or anyone else. Like, I think for us as a league, the most important part is to be aware of that. Like I was talking to some colleagues about the PWR and sort of their signing spree. What was it, a week or 2 weeks ago? I forget exactly when. But I was sort of articulating the fact that it felt very different than the Tour Wars, right? And I think like any of us that are involved in pro pickleball, like you maybe got like a little inkling of it, but from the sort of impact on the broader business, it's like they're going after a different audience, is what it felt like. And they're doing it with sort of a part of the talent group that we obviously have involved in our league, but like they're also doing it with others. And because pickleball is becoming such a global sport, like there's room in the ecosystem for that. So I think like the way I would position this is we're already setting the precedent that we're looking beyond 2026 and you have to look no farther than the Gabe Tardio deal. And then B, it's, comes down to timing in a lot of ways, but on the sort of competitive leagues, like you mentioned, it's more about keeping an eye and understanding what they're doing. And then if needed to react, but it hasn't really felt like we needed to in 2025 yet. So we'll see what the future holds.
I mean, you think that they're probably going after a different type of player because, I mean, UPA is essentially locked up.
Yeah, it's the
Uh,
moat, right? It's the competitive moat, right? Like
yeah,
if you're Uber, they like went to market and like put a bunch of remember like OG Uber was like a black sedan and they just like hired a bunch of drivers and were like, all right, get on our platform and
yeah.
then we can get as many people onto it as possible, drive you around and then they started to transition to self-drive, like excuse me,
Yeah,
like people driving those
I watched
cars
that
and
video.
then exactly, yeah. So we get it. I mean, it's again the case with like any nascent industry and like how it gets started. You're gonna have this competition and all that stuff.
So your title with MLP is the strategic officer.
So it's UPA strategy officer, chief strategy officer.
So what will you
For
be in
net,
charge of specifically?
yeah, great question. So it's really like three core categories. The first is media broadcast. So I have a full appreciation for the fact that within 2 years we've gotten to the place where like for all intents and purposes you can like watch competitive pickleball no matter where you are. Is it, could it be better, easier to find? Of course. Could it be better produced? Of course. But for where we were 2 3 years ago, like when I was trying to draft for the Aces in 2023 and I'm like on people's Instagrams, Facebooks. Jimmy, you're probably doing the same thing. Like, yo, let me catch this drill video of this person on their
Dude, we
Facebook
watched
page.
grainy video. This is a true story. Rachel Rohrabacher. Okay. We were watching Richie and I were watching grainy videos of Rachel Rohrbacher filmed on a GoPro by what's the dude's name in Vegas? Uh, he's old. Anyways, he had like a GoPro playing like a backyard freaking event with her, and we were trying to watch videos to see, you know, if Rachel is worth drafting. Is she good? And
Yeah, they got game. Yeah, yeah. And so media broadcast is like core focus one. The second is content and storytelling. Because like any great league, I always draw the analogy like college football, for example. Like when you tune in a college game day, that 3 hour broadcast, I mean, it gets you so intrigued on like 20 different matches, right? You'll have like BYU's playing Arizona State, and the former Arizona State wide receiver transferred to BYU, and now he's facing his old team and his old coach who recruited him. And you're like, oh, like I'm interested in this now. And we just have to develop our version of that because I think last year it was so much about getting the live product on the ground, but we could do way more in telling fans like what's actually going on. And what was cool to see is some of that happen organically, like the AB and Rachel versus AL and Catherine rivalry, like kind of sprouted
Do
up
you ever see
organically
the format changing in terms of players on the team or number of matches or anything like that?
on the MLP side.
Yeah.
I think I mean, yes, it'll change. I think generally it will be a team-based format with a, set of matches that constitute the regular season and a set of matches that constitute the playoffs. And what we got to do is help people understand why match 10 versus 13 matters, but also do more around like creating entertainment around the team sport. Like if you go to like a top tier MLP match, right? For me, that was my most recent one was like Orlando with the playoffs, and it was the five splash match one, and you had the Star Spangled Banner, and you had this the intros, and the audience was buzzing, and I mean we had great weather too. Like we gotta like create that atmosphere, and it's coming, it's coming. So that's sort of focus area two, and then three is really around helping everything else around MLP grow with the team owners. So I always say the most powerful thing about team sports is if you can get all of them aligned, then you have, in our case, 22 team owners rowing in the same direction, which is a huge network effect and multiplier relative to like a single entity doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we always compare like the drive to survive, and like the NBA. LeBron just released. They were
The
just released
starting
five, and all these things like telling the stories is important. And people, I think that's one of the reasons our podcast is successful is because we talk about things that people probably don't normally talk about. It makes the players look human, and it's more like sometimes it's behind the scenes stuff, and it's things that this, right? Like you're literally, what other league is breaking down their finances for the
Yeah.
public, right? Like that allows people to connect, and it allows people to feel like they're a part of it. And I think we need to do a better job of that with the players, right? And telling those stories. I mean, there's some incredible stories out there for some of these players, and there's storylines, like you said, too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I think all that stuff is important, and all that's going to do is just create more buzz. Like we all know Ben and Colin Johns are brothers, great. Like we can only pump that. Annalise 17, well, pretty soon not anymore, actually. But we can only pump those storylines so much. Like I think there's other things out there that as a league and obviously promotion or whatever.
All right, a few more questions somebody else had. I'm just going to knock them off, and then you can maybe answer them individually or as a whole. Somebody said, what is UPA's goal with regard to a future TV contract? How soon and how much money? What type of viewership would they need to show in order to get somebody to bite? And then what is their current average viewership on Pickleball TV on a Saturday or a Sunday during PPA semi or finals? What about during an MLP match? If you can remember those, if you want me to repeat any of them.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll answer I think it was the third one. What does it take for someone to bite first? Which is they're biting, like full stop. So
Can
we
you
have had,
disclose like how large those contracts are or what the ballpark
well,
range
so,
is?
so yeah, so that I'll then come to that first question, which is like, what is the deal? And the way we looked at this is there's kind of two lenses in how we are approaching our media strategy. The first is to the casual consumer, UPA is sort of an entity that exists at the top, but like doesn't actually have any meaning. You're talking about the PBA Tour and you're talking about MLP. And if I'm tuning into television, I'm watching one of those two things. And so what we're trying to align on is what's the media strategy that's right for each versus assuming that it's the same for both. So on the PBA Tour, you've seen a ton around them securing broadcast slots with big linear TV channels, Fox, CBS, ESPN, even streaming, Amazon Prime, etc. And saying, okay, we're a tour-based league that is the pit sort of the best players against the best players. And for us, it's all about securing as many eyeballs as we can on our product. And so what that means is you're going after the channels that have way bigger penetration, or you're going after Pickleball TV where anyone can tune in. But it's like all about like eyeballs, eyeballs, eyeballs. That's the PPA Tour. Makes a ton of sense. And we kind of get into sort of how we're thinking about their deal in a second. On the MLP side, it's like a slightly different dynamic because the advantage of being team-based cities, or excuse me, city-based teams, not team-based cities, is you can have some endemic reason for why a fan should potentially tune in. It's not perfect, but if I live in California, if I live in, Sacramento, and I see the California Black Bears up, I'm like mildly more intrigued to tune into them than if the same team that was like on my screen, which was the LA, Utah Black Diamonds. I know they're next door, but whatever. So what we're trying to align for the MLP is how do we penetrate those local markets? And that was a big reason why we shifted to the summer, because the most successful channels that do that are regional sports networks and MSG Network in New York, or I don't know what it is in Utah, but they're the ones in those households. So we're looking at, okay, how do we reach those local viewers while also having, some of our bigger events, the midseason tournament, the playoffs, opening weekend in Orlando at sort of the national level. And then the timeline for that, like this is the fun game that exists, because you have this spectrum where like the networks with more eyeballs aren't willing to fork up the most dollars, and the networks with less eyeballs, like Apple TV Plus as an example, tend to fork up more dollars. So if you look across that spectrum, you could say, all right, the MLS, they went with the latter, which is we're going to limit the number of eyeballs we have, but we're going to secure the bag, which for where they were as a league, I think made a ton of sense. On the former side, you've got what the PPA Tour is doing, which is like not securing a ton of dollars yet from the Foxes and whoever in the world. They're focused heavily on eyeballs. I think for now, our focus is more on the eyeball awareness side than it is on like driving media dollars tomorrow. However, I do feel like based on the conversations that we've had, we're going to have some success in securing those dollars. But as it currently stands, like we've got an ownership group that's willing to fund us, as is clear with how quickly the bridge loan was secured. We've got a meaningful amount of runway for the next couple of years. And we have this unique business model where you've got amateur registrations and sponsorship and ticketing that are able to support the business until the media becomes available. So I think our timeline is like 2 to 3 years. I think the big focus right now is helping fans understand where they can watch us. And like Pickleball TV dropping today is like a big part of that. Like now, all right, go to this iOS app, watch, and you can like watch pro pickleball. And that was, much harder thing to do in 2023 or even 24.
So I do have a question, and maybe I don't know if you can speak on this or not, but so one of the things in the press release that UPA sent out was that there was 500,000 viewers on when it was aired on Fox. And that's like the largest television audience of all time for pro pickleball, right?
Yep.
Which is amazing. That agreement with Fox, because there's a lot of, obviously, I won't say who, but you can guess, rumors out there about PPA had to pay for that spot on Fox. Now, I sat in some of these MLP meetings before the merger, and essentially, the way the TV deals work is usually sometimes like at this point, this point in the league's history, I guess, sometimes it's like a 50% revenue split on ads, sometimes, but I didn't hear anybody ever mention that like they literally were physically, hey, we're paying to be on this channel. Is that accurate? Not accurate? Like what? How's that
We
agreement?
are not paying to be on channels.
Okay.
Uh, we are identifying open slots on Fox, Fox Sports 1, Fox Sports 2, CBS, ESPN2, and saying, hey, we think our content is intriguing. We'll produce it and we'll send it to you, and you guys put it on your network. But yeah, there's no like, hey, Fox, like, come on, like, throw us a bone, take some dollars. That does not exist.
Okay.
I have two questions left. Would you draft Jilly B to the Brooklyn Aces if you were still there?
Nah, man, we have our two Coop and Lane Sleeth. Like, we're good on the women's side. But I can't speak to the Aces as much anymore. I'm trying to really remove my conflict of interest piece. But I was proud of what we had as a roster. Did it come together in the way I wish? No, but that would have been too good to be true to like win the ship in Challenger and then come over to Dallas and take this role. Like, God is great, but sometimes you got to take a few on the chin.
Then the other one I had is what's been your former best Aces team? Which team was it?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, I mean, I think I had some of the most fun with the team you were on, Tyler, and
Let's
that
go.
that
Is that because
MLB
I was on that
Dallas.
team?
No, you were on the sideline, Jimmy. Come on now.
Yeah, I
But
know.
that run in Dallas to the semis, I still think about that on occasion because the fact that we like went to Dreambreaker after the Megan Dazan injury thing and Coop ripped two, backhands down the line to win us that match. Oh, insane. And then I always think about like the next morning, and Jimmy, you probably appreciate this now after like having been the GM for a bit, like we felt like we did it, we felt like we were accomplished and like the juice just wasn't there to like go up against this juggernaut DC team and like take on Riley and the Kawamotos and Christian who felt like they were on a mission. I always wonder like what I could have done differently. I don't know if there was anything. But it's like a moment I think, about as I was transitioning away from the Aces of like, all right, it's 7:45 a.m. It's cold. We just got off a thriller the night before against Columbus, and like how do you like inject your team with motivation and
I think about it
excitement
all
or
the
just like
time.
free will?
Yeah. Yeah, I think about that all the time because the hardest thing for me watching like, the Bears this year, obviously we didn't have great success, but we played you guys really, really tough in the midseason tournament,
Yeah.
right? Like we played you guys super tough. We went to Dreambreaker and or we play Atlanta with Jaume and Todd Fote and we're leading the Dreambreaker 20-9 and then we would
Yeah.
lose. And it's like it was like as a GM and like what can I do? Like you have to learn to win. Like I feel
Yep.
like learning to win is almost like a skill, just like a backhand dink, you
Yeah,
know.
I agree with that.
And I always second guess myself, like what could I have done? Like what should I have used a timeout here? Should we have done this? Should we have?
You should have.
I mean, yeah, obviously we won 3 times, but but I get that for sure.
We're running low
Yep.
on time.
So
Can we expect to see Samin and Connor Pardo continuing to be active on Twitter on X?
That was a great question. Connor and I had that conversation a little bit yesterday. And I would say when the time or moment warrants itself, yes. Like as much as I would love to say that like we could act like the NBA and the NFL and let sort of traditional PR exist and be, that buttoned up, like our fans almost deserve more, if that makes sense. Like I think they've been with us now for a couple years. They're on this journey with us as much as team owners and players and everyone else is. And so a little bit of a look behind the scenes, I think, in a direct line to someone is helpful because people gravitate towards people, and that's a part of it. And so like that's why your podcast is super successful, right? Jimmy, I've been around you. Like we were in at World, and like people are like dapping you up. Oh man, I listen to KOTC, like it's my favorite show. And so I would say, in general, yes. I think part of the big motivation behind the response yesterday was just, the fact that obviously it, got pretty widespread, but B, it affects a lot of stakeholders, many of whom fall under Connor and I's responsibilities to look after. I mean, yes, of course, like we're talking about, the players that, constantly get attention and the team owners, but like there's employees that UPA employs, and when you threaten the business of what we're trying to build, like you affect those
Not
people
only
and their
threatening, but
livelihoods.
just putting out the notion that something may or may not be happening, whether it's true or not. It's totally
Totally, totally.
uh,
That's a
Do
better way to say
you,
it.
but do you have regrets about taking shots at Jill's skill level at the end? Do you feel like as an executive or like, as a, you
Yeah, I
know,
mean, there's probably like on the record, probably better ways to have gone about it. At the same time, like I think, you know, everything I said, I stand behind because at the end of the day, I did mean it. And it's important. Like, look, there's a line that people shouldn't cross. I don't think any of us were anywhere near that line. And
I
for me, it
always
was
tell
just,
people, I mean, they were responding. They weren't the ones who initiated anything, and
yeah,
so that's
yeah,
something to keep in mind
well,
as
yeah,
well.
I agree with that. But my thing is does that overshadow what was actually a very good point that you're making? You know what I'm
probably,
saying?
probably.
Does that, I mean, even Connor, right? Like if you read Connor's response, like those first four paragraphs or whatever were textbook and it was a great response to her. And then at the end, he kind of takes, little shots at her.
The chat GPT ran out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
there
Like
you go.
he didn't
All
renew
right,
his
so I know
subscription.
we're coming up on time. What's next? I'm gonna come back. We're gonna talk more MLP competition when that's ready too.
Yeah, when that's ready to go, let's talk more MLP
Thanks,
competition.
Samin. We love you.
Samin, I mean, just give us real fast, what's your, I mean, 2025, what's the perfect 2025 look like?
Banger of a season, media deal at the end of it.
Done.